It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday segment of the MSD on 117.8. It's Tuesday, February 11th, and we are so happy to continue this week together with the Lord. So how's everyone doing? How was your weekend? What's going on in your part of the world? For us here in America, and this is really interesting because I haven't seen this at the church level before, at least to my knowledge. Maybe some churches have had it before, but I think it's a relatively new thing, right? But and Pastor Sky, has talked about sports many times, like on the MSD, and like if you know him personally, like sports is something that he's like very much into, right? And so yesterday was possibly the biggest event in sports that happens every year in America. It was the Super Bowl. And yes, like this is really like it's a huge thing, right, in the US. And I think I actually learned this from Pastor Sky, but the NFL, right, which it's like the league, right, for American football, is actually the biggest sports league in the world, right? Like compared to like actual football or soccer, right? Like the American Football League is the biggest sporting organization in the world, and that I think that value is measured in terms of dollars, like earned in terms of like the money that the league brings in, and maybe there's some other measurements and metrics about that. Like I'm sure pretty related to money generated, it would like correspond to views and such too, but I'm sure there's like a lot of different complicated things. But like per like I think like how much money the leagues make, the NFL is the biggest sporting organization in the world, and that's actually something that I learned from Pastor Sky. And I think especially for those like in the US, that's really surprising. And I think all across the world people are really surprised, because I think people think that soccer is like a much bigger sport, right? And then like soccer, it definitely is a big sport, but yeah, like I think like when you come to the US and you see like how much people are into athletics and sports here, like watching sports, playing sports, talking about sports, you can kind of tell like where like the backing of sports comes from, right? And that comes with its pros and its cons. But related to that, right, I was mentioning like I hadn't seen this happen at church before, but like here in the US, like at least I know in New York, I don't know if they've done this before, but they hosted a watch party on Sunday, right? That was open for newcomers and stuff at the church, right? And I think like in the past, at least like in all the churches that I've been in, like in the US, like we never really had a watch party. Like you may have had like an informal one. Like I remember when I was in Hawaii, when the Super Bowl was on, like we watched together in Hawaii. But I hadn't done this like in the church building, right? In like an area, like whether it was for like a newcomer event or just like as a church event. Like I've never seen this before, so it was very, very, very interesting. So for myself, like I was watching this like together with the people, the law students here, and it was really different because growing up, I was never like super into watching football. Like I always thought that it was fun to play, but I never like played it like, on the team or anything like in school, right? But like just in PE, right? In our physical education classes. And I thought that was really fun. But I never really learned like all the ins and outs of the sport. But here, like on the East Coast of the US, it's like so big, right? And so like this weekend, it was just such a huge thing, and all of these law students were in on it, right? And so we had an event together with these law students, and that's what we were doing like here on this Sunday, right? So that's what is happening here, right? In the US, and I'm sure Pastor Sky may have talked about it yesterday on Monday's episode. For me, I'm recording the Sunday night, so I have yet to listen to what he said on Monday, right? But yeah, like if you ever have a chance, like feel free to watch American football. Like it's very, very interesting, and I think like it's a very enjoyable sport to watch. And like when you learn like the like even like the different kind of tactics and stuff that they employ, it's a really enjoyable sport to watch, right? It involves a very high level of strategy and stuff too, that when a team can execute it, right, it's really, really like amazing. Yeah, and so it's a huge American cultural thing, and I think as we mentioned, even with the New York church, like this is like I don't know if they've done this in the past. Maybe they did this while Pastor Sky was there, but like this is the first I've seen where a church hosted a watch party, right, and became very involved, and hoping to draw in newcomers because, as we said, it's the biggest sporting organization in the world, right, and it gets the most amount of views, right, of any sport. So that was part of it. And related to that, the other big thing that happened this Sunday, or not this Sunday, but this weekend, was we started a new SS program, right? And I think we'll get into it like after the first break, but like I was really, really shocked because this program is something that we've been talking about for a while. And I wasn't really quite certain that a lot of the SS would join. And like, so before, like, I think like even like 2 minutes before the time, like when like the staff members were joined on the Zoom call, we're like, let's take a guess how many SS will come. And I made a joke. I said like I think like -1 of the kids would join, right? Because like the thing that happened was like we sent the announcement, and a lot of this was all actually on me too, right? So we sent the announcement to like the core church leaders, right? Like, and so they announced it during like their like weekly like core meeting that they have. And so I think all of the head leaders got like the gist of the content and what we were gonna do, but there wasn't like a clear thing like about like, okay, so announce this to your churches, right? Like, let's get this done. And so like while this is something that we wanted to do, there were like little bits and pieces here and there that weren't like quite settled in, right? The details weren't filled out. And so we were like, okay, like we could push this back and like give a more detailed answer and like figure out these little minor things, or we can just go ahead and get started. And we opted for the latter. And part of the reasoning for that is like before, right, if it was like a different program, like a one-off thing, and like something wasn't like quite completely settled, of course, like we want to do things perfectly, so we would defer. But one of the objectives with this current program that we're running is that we hope to do this quite regularly. Right, this exact program. And I'll get into the details about this, like I said, like after the break. But because we want to do this regularly, like possibly annually, we're like, okay, if one of the kids can't join everything, and if they can't join at one point, hopefully the following year they'll join, right? And they'll know that this is always available for them. And we just want to make it widely accessible for everyone. Right, so those are the two major exciting things, and so I'll mostly be talking about what the SS program was, and I hope that everyone's excited for it because it was quite like always, like any like spiritual program that we run. There were differences about it, like different things than we expected. One of the things, as you mentioned, there were a lot more kids that joined than we anticipated, right? And that, which was such a positive, it was such a plus. And so that was one big thing. But I think the content of it was the most important, not unexpected, but like the thing that we were most expectant about, and the thing that lived up to our expectations. Right, so I'll leave it up there. And so with that, let's go into our first break for today, and I will catch you guys afterwards to share, what happened during the SS program.
hardships may come, whether life's good or sad. Lord, your love is all I need. Even today, no matter what I face, Heavenly Trinity, your great love is all I need. When our hearts match, where our thoughts are one and the same, love connects us still, no matter where we are. We are one body, one heart.
Awesome. So hope you guys enjoyed that break with It's Only You. And so going into the meat of today, I think this covers like a number of different things for Bible today, right? It covers both what happens with the SS as well as with the Word, right? Because I think the Word, right, and like even this week's message about, God's words are life, right? His thoughts are life. This is really at the crux, at the core of like, what it is that the Trinity are doing today. And I think that this week's message perfectly aligned with what the SS program, what this first one was about too, right? So I think to give like the overview of what the SS program is intended to be, like from a few years back, right? Something has given this direction with second generation, and he mentioned it again in this week's message. And not just for second generation, but he said for those who've been here for a long time, for newcomers, to have them relearn, right? To teach them again, right? Educate them again, right? And this includes all of us, right? Because there's no one who's not in that category, right? You're either a newcomer or a second generation or someone who's been here a long time, right? That literally covers everyone, right? And so, and like all of us really need to always learn from God again, right? So we started this program, which initially it didn't have a name, but like out of nowhere, like we got the name Learn From Me, right? And like I have no idea who came up with it, but we made like a small flyer, and the program is called Learn From Me, right? And so this program, right, and that title is perfectly befitting because pursuant to Sun's instruction about re-educating the second generation, we wanted to teach the SS like the 30 principles, and especially like the core lessons. Like there's a number of them that like Korea, and I'm guessing like straight from Sun's said to have them learn deeply. And specifically, he asked us to actually educate them using like advanced lectures in one-on-one or like in-person lectures. But like currently, that didn't seem exactly feasible. But that wasn't like the main thing. The main thing was we wanted to do that, but we also wanted to have something done regularly. Because one of the things that we saw happening in the past as we were running our SS or our second generation program is that we would always expend effort for like the 3 to 6 month program that we would have, and then we'd have to plan again for the next one. And of course, like we have to consistently and constantly do those things too. But what we notice is that there's kind of this lack of like a curriculum that we follow, right? That we hope that, the SS would really learn from. And so from this program, Learn From Me, what it is that we start to have the kids watch 선생님's lecture series from 2006. Right, like this was a big lecture series that he did in the mornings and that he recorded and he sent all across the world, right, like in 2006. And so like I'm sure like you have seen bits and pieces of it if you haven't like listened to the whole thing like from start to finish. But he covered like a lot of the key lessons in this time period, right? And he recorded it and for like the whole world. And one of the things he mentions in that lecture is that like he records these things and he created all of these charts and he created all of these books and he created all of these lectures so that people like 50 years from now and 100 years from now and 50 generations from now that they'll still be able to use this and learn from it, right? And like it was really uncanny, right? Because like he recorded them in 2006 and we were reviewing them in 2025, right? Like some almost 20 years later, right? Like, and if you include like 2006 like into that mix, exactly 20 years later. And so like we like from now until May, like every other week we're going to be playing one of these videos for the SS. And so like at first we were like, oh my gosh, like are any of the S's going to show up? Because like we said, like there were some hiccups with announcements and these kind of various things. So we're like, are the kids going to join? And if they join and they see that there's no one else there, are they going to stick around and listen to the whole thing? Right? So these are kind of questions and concerns that we had, right? But like as soon as like the timer reached, like probably half, right? If not a little more than half, right, of the SS that we were hoping would join, like join the time. And we also had some older folks and some SS teachers who joined because they also wanted to re-listen to like this lecture series as well. Right, so this first ever lecture was the lecture about resurrection. Right, and this is like such a big one, right? So as you mentioned, like there's kind of a list that Korea sent where like, okay, they were like focus on these lessons. These ones are like the critical ones that the kids should learn like from an advanced lecturer in person, right? And so of course we have to do that too, but like I can see why, right? Because I think out of these lectures, I'm sure there's multiple reasons behind why, but one of the things that I got was that I think for second generation, the resurrection lesson is maybe a little bit difficult to understand the significance of, right? And Rachel can correct me if she feels differently, right? Like as a second generation, and maybe like this is just one person's take on this, right? But like growing up in Providence, and I think the biggest thing is like knowing about physical versus spiritual death. And you know that like the important death is the death of the spirit, right? And living in the spirit. So because of that, the resurrection lesson and like knowing about something, even knowing about Jesus and all of these things, it makes it so that the lesson isn't very shocking, right? Because you've known like this is what you've been listening to for like from the moment that you've been born, maybe even before the moment that you comprehended the words, right? So like listening to something new, I was like, okay, like let me try to really understand this, right? Because this lesson isn't just for us, but he wants us to know this so that we can explain it to other people, that we can really know it very clearly, that we can know the ins and outs, and most importantly, so that we can resurrect, right, in the ways that we are dead and come alive and make sure that we keep this word, right? Like as this week's word said, right, his words are full of life, right? And so like we have to treasure it like life, and like no, there's no better word than with the resurrection lesson. And so like yeah, like when we listen to Sunseem's lecture, like this was so amazing, right? The way he like explains it and goes into it, right? So he said like resurrection, right? This is like one of the key doctrines of Christianity, right? And like for Christians, right? And like this is the reason why we believe, right? And like and that we say that our hope and joy is greater, right, than any other religion in the world because we have the resurrection, right? But even in the New Testament time period, they don't clearly know what the resurrection means, right? Like they believe that what they hope for is resurrection in the body. Right. And so like I'm sure for all of us like listening to this, like whether we're second generation or people who came from the former faith or people who came from like an atheist background or like a Buddhist background and agnostic background, whatever it might be, like this is probably a key lecture. And I'm wondering what the key was for everyone, because I do want to understand this and research into this more deeply, right? Like what about the resurrection lesson was really key for you? Right, of course, something you broke it down, but I want to see like what your guys' reaction was, right? Like how you came to understand this lesson, right? Like, but like mainly like what something even talks about like through this lecture, like he talks about like what's the problem? Like where does it come from? Like where does this question about the resurrection come from, right? And like the biggest thing that he points to is like like there's hundreds of times when death is mentioned in the Bible, right? And like the very first time is in the book of Genesis, right? Like with the purpose of creation and the fall, right? Stuff like that. And so we know from that lecture what happens and what death means, and like so what it means from God's perspective that things are dead, right? And like what it means in this time period, right? As Jesus has said from 2,000 years ago until today about what it means to resurrect. right? Like how life came from Jesus, how through the word we come to life, exactly like this week's message, right? Like by putting God's words into practice, we live this life that is alive in spirit, and that like takes action on all the things that God has willed for. And it's only by being alive that we fulfill the will that God has for each one of us. And so I hope that, if you haven't had the chance to listen to this lecture, or it's been a while, that maybe like you can even spark this program within your own church, or even by yourself, right? If you can ask a leader or someone to view these lectures from that long ago, right? Because something really goes into it. On the flip side, I guess like one other possible way to go about it is like, as they announced, right, for the 18th seminary, at least the education portions, right, which are going to be available twice a week, right, which is so incredible, right? Twice a week, this incredible education will be prepared, and that education will be open for all of Providence. And I think that is so amazing, because at the core of Providence, there's nothing else besides at the core than the Word, right? Like I think like this is something shocking that we all really need to think about, right? There at the core of Providence is the Word. Right, and I say this because I think this came to mind, like being here in law school, right, like, and like being in the world of politics, like being in this world where people are really driven and they want to accomplish things like out in the world, and so they're like trying to employ different means, right, to accomplish that. Of course, they're like working hard, but they're trying to get good at like talking to people and like doing these kind of things and manipulating things so that they can get what they want. And so when you have like a society built on those things, and when you have a community, an organization, and a purpose centered around those kinds of things, then at the core, you have that. Like you have like this human kind of humanistic method at the core. But in Providence, like even if you don't know all the ongoings, like even if you don't know like the logistics and the planning and the things, the work going on in the background, right? Like that's really all that those things are, right? Everything else that's being done, that's the background, right? And even like all the things that God is doing, like you can't even know all those things even if you wanted to. Right? But we know that God is taking action. And so instead of all of these like superfluous things that the world focuses on, right? Like trying to manipulate people, trying to like get people to do certain things a certain way according to like what we want, like what we know to be the more important, the more fundamental thing is the Word of God that is alive, right? And like, so you don't have to look anywhere. As long as you know where the Word comes from, right, which is Sunday, Wednesday, the morning messages, and like even in programs like this where we're gonna get to listen to education 2 times in a week, that's the core, right? And when you have captured the Word, when you take action on the Word, when you listen to the Word, you know you're at the core of Providence. And you know that you're running at the forefront, right? There's no like of course, like for me, I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of like, oh, we need special missions or special titles, anything like that, right? Being a bride of this history, that is the highest praise, that is the highest goal, right? And attaining that means that you're already in less than 1% of all of the people that God has chosen in this time period, right? And so that is the greatest accolade, right? And once you reach that level, it's kind of like getting to like the top 1% of wealth in the world, and like being like the top 1% of wealth between compared to the top like 0.5%, right? Will it really make a huge difference in a bearing in your life? And of course, like that's not like necessarily the way to think about it in all ways, but at least I'm thinking about like what's the most important thing. Like when you think about like in your life in Providence, like sometimes you might wonder like, oh, what else do I have to do? Like what is it that my role is, my position, or like what is it that's important for me? What's the goal in Providence that I have to achieve, right? And I think some of those questions are valid, but at the core we can't forget the biggest thing, which is that we have the Word, and the Word flows endlessly, right? Even if you try to master a week's word for that week, you could spend a whole week doing that, right? And so there's no like other places to really turn your attention and do something else and be like, oh, let me try to get involved in the church in planning this thing or operating this thing, or like trying to like move Providence by like moving people, stuff like that, right? And the word warns us against these things. And of course, like those things are necessary when it comes to doing the work that God wants us to do. But like if we think about it in that angle, then it becomes something where we're trying to put our will, right? And we are trying to become the head, which is something that the word like really warned us about, right? And there's something that something actually really like talked about in the resurrection lesson that was really key. And I think this one was just so big for this lesson and for understanding resurrection and life. Right, like one of the things that the word has said was that, right, like the biggest thing that God looks for in a person is their heart, right? And their heart determines whether they are alive before God or not, right? And the examples that he talked about was about like King Saul, right? And like when he appeared before before the prophet Samuel, right? Like he wasn't alive in his heart before God, right? And so like this is one of the things that shows us that being alive spiritually, and so if we are dead spiritually, coming back to life in the spirit is so important, because you can be alive in the body and you can be tall and handsome and successful and have everything and so on and so forth, and like look good before the world. But if your heart is dead, if your soul and spirit are dead, and if your actions are dead before Christ, then you are dead before God. Versus, even if on the outside in your body you may be suffering or dying or going through tribulations, difficulties, persecution, whatever, like David, if you have a heart that is alive, then before God you are alive. And that is the thing that God truly looks at. And so that's one of the things that's something emphasized both in the resurrection lesson and, just I think in this week's message as well, which I thought was so deep, right? And so this really goes for all of us. And I think, this is something that we know, but I myself forgot it too, right? And so I hope that everyone can be reminded of that, like wherever you are, like currently in your life today, like whether you have some areas that you need to resurrect in, or whether you're alive, right? Whatever it is, this is something that we must remember for the rest of our lifetime, right? As this week's message said, this isn't just a message to read once or to think about once, but the fact that God's words are life, that his words is what constitutes life, is something that we must know always, right? And so throughout our entire life, we must always come alive. We must always be alive. Each and every day, we must know and be grateful in our hearts. And when we are grateful, God answers us right away, right? Like that's something that he emphasized, right? And so that's kind of a lot of the things from the resurrection lesson. I really hope that this week can be a week where we challenge ourselves to resurrect in a variety of different ways, and that like through the 18th seminary education, through reading the Bible, through reading the morning proverbs and setting condition on Wednesdays and Sundays, and to listen and to review the word, that we will all keep God's living the word in our hearts and come alive. Right, and so there are a couple other shocking things from this time, and so I'll kind of share them before we conclude Bible today. But like we said, right, like this message came out in 2006, and so for many of the people joining right now, like you may have heard this at some point, right? Your church may have played it. Maybe you were around in 2006 when this message was coming out. But at some point, your manager, your lecturer may have shown it to you. If not, like it's probably because there were so many other things, other messages that they could show you that they didn't. But if you never heard it before, then I hope that you do at some point get a chance to listen to it. And it's not because that it's the only resource or it's the main resource. It definitely is a core thing that you should watch, but there's something emphasizes in it, and it's something that we can learn from what he does too, and specifically what he does in the lectures, but just something that he does through his whole life. Like one of the things that something he talks about in the very beginning is that God can do hundreds of billions of things. Right? God can do hundreds of billions of things. Right? What is it that God can't do? What is it that God isn't doing? Right? God is doing everything. Right? But if we can't explain it well, then he will be frustrated. right? Like it's like one of the example that he gave is like if the husband is like married to a woman, or right, or if he's interested in a woman, but the woman thinks that he's only good at delivering the message, right? And so she's like, oh, he's a good speaker, right? And that's all she knows about him. But when in fact he's good at playing soccer, he's good at like finding forms like in trees and rocks, and he's good at like natural landscaping, he's good at evangelizing, he's good at cooking, he's good at all of these things. But if all that the woman recognizes is that, oh, this person is good at speaking, right? Then that person will be so frustrated, right? And I think we can really understand that, right? And you can even apply it to yourself, right? When other people don't understand something about you, it's very frustrating, right? And how much more with God? Because I think this is so poignant, right? Like God is good at hundreds of billions of things, right? And what that means is that throughout God's history and in the Bible, all of the things that God has done and that he's fulfilled, that he promised and fulfilled, that we're like, the Bible is a book of history, right? So it talks specifically about everything that he did from the time of Adam all the way to the time of Moses, to the time of Jesus, and until now, right? And he made promises throughout 6,000 years, and he surely fulfilled them in this time period, right? So he is someone who did that, right? So for someone to be able to do that, they need to be good at so many things, and God has not disappointed, but he has fulfilled his history absolutely. And so if we fail to know, right? If we fail to know, like, can you explain all that? Can you explain what he did in Deuteronomy, right? In Exodus? Can you explain what he did in Malachi, in Isaiah, in in the Gospels, right? In the oh man, what's that word? The apostolic? No, it's not the right word. But like the four Gospels, right? And what he did through Peter afterwards, and what he's doing in history today now, right? And that's a thing that something you focus on in this week's message, right? Like we have to testify about the history today, right? We didn't even know what God was going to use Warmingdong for, but people this is exactly to the point about people who think that the core isn't the word, but that the core is like, oh, trying to do something away from the center, right? Like, oh, something is like working on Warmingdong. Like I don't know if that's that important, but so I'm gonna go missionize in the cities, right? The people who do that and have this different priority than what heaven intends, right? Like if you sow away from the center, then you become people who aren't able to explain really well what God is doing, right? And you aren't able to show it, right? There's some things that God can't even tell us exactly. And I'm sure Pastor Sky may have mentioned it yesterday, but I thought this was really incredible too. And this will be like one of the last points for today, right? But God said that if I had told you exactly what Warmingdong was going to be, right? This natural temple on the earth, right? And that the ambition masterpiece was supposed to be God's temple here on the earth. He said that we would have been too afraid to build it, right? We would have been too afraid to take action, right? Too afraid of failure, too afraid of this and that, too afraid of what that might even mean, right? And we would die, right? But instead, he told us exactly what we needed to know, and he let us realize the rest on our own, right? And so I think this is so powerful and true, because I think some of us are curious and we're wondering, like, what is the purpose of our life? Like, what can we do for Providence? What is my mission here and there? What can I do out in the world? What can I do in my church, in my family, in my position? Who am I? My uniqueness. Like those are questions that I'm sure all of us could have. But remember, the core is the word, right? And like the things about our life, things that we must realize, maybe God has a plan for you that's like far bigger than you can expect. And if you knew about it right now, you'd be scared, you'd be worried. But instead, you know what you know now, right? And you can pray earnestly for the things that you don't know, because we do have to fulfill that responsibility too. But I think in terms of this week's message, what was so deep is that he gave us the core. He gave us the answer. He said, "My words are life, and so keep my words." And so for us, yes, we may have various different questions about our future, questions about what's happening in Providence, questions about what's going to happen with Sunzinglim, and what's going to happen, even with the 18th seminary, with different kind of things, with stars, with the blessing, with blah, 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 this and that, my career, so on and so forth. All of those things are not only secondary, but they are contained within the will. They are contained within the word, right? And so if we live a living life with that right resurrected heart, keeping the word and the Lord in our center, making sure that we're building Warmyeongdong in our hearts, in our life, and achieving the life that God wants for us, we will absolutely fulfill all of the things that God has intended. Of course, we have to work hard, and if we had stopped at any time, then Warmyeongdong would have amounted just to a rock garden, as 선생님 mentioned. Right? In the beginning, we thought that it would be just a training ground, a training camp, right? That's what 선생님 intended. That's what maybe the inspiration was in the beginning. Oh, like we're gonna have some place to be a spiritual training ground. But no one expected it to be God's natural temple that would be used to evangelize tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the world and have millions of visitors like per year. And going forward in the future, even more so than this. And so I really hope that, we can really learn a lot from this word and from this lesson of the resurrection. If there are ways that each of us must come alive in our hearts, may we do so. And I really hope that this week will be a week where we keep God's words close to our heart and make it our core. And so that's it for Bible today. We'll head into the second break, and then I will hand it off to Rachel with 2G Talks.
Thoughts are the start, thoughts are the wellspring of life. Learn and grow, learn to think. Thoughts improve every day, as much as you think. Know the truth, thoughts are life. They're treasures from God. Focus well, center your thoughts. Focus well, think deeper and higher still. Physically, spiritually, thoughts will determine your fate. God ordained that all people live by their thoughts in this way. This is how we're made. God the Spirit and the Son This is joy living as the raptured bride. Welcome back, everyone, to 2G Talks. Rachel here. 2G Talks is the segment I hope to create a narrative and conversation around 2nd Gen's experience in Providence, while also discussing other topics related to 2nd Gen, all centered only on the Lord. For today's 2G Talks, I have a reflection on relationships, as well as a small announcement. How was y'all's weekend? Or the start of your week, I should say. I hope everyone is doing well. I know a lot of my close friends and colleagues are all getting sick, so please be careful out there. Wash your hands, drink a lot of water, anything you can do. So yeah, I hope everyone can stay safe and healthy. Personally, for me, it's a pretty big week because, as I mentioned last week, by the time that y'all listen to this podcast on Tuesday, I will have turned in or be turning in my resignation letter to my principal to be informing him that I will not return next year, which is crazy. I'm ending my contract. I'm still going to be working until the end of the school year, which is at the end of May. But yeah, I can't believe it's actually happening. I remember my mother and I talking about me taking time off to run full-time for Providence all the way in October or November, and thinking that February was so far away, but now it's finally here, so I'm really looking forward to it. And like I said, I have my small little announcement that I wanted to share with you guys. It really is just a small announcement, but officially I have been approved for the title of Educational Minister. Yes. I wasn't 100% sure about even filling out the application, but the Holy Spirit really inspired the leaders who motivated me and encouraged me to fill it out, and so I did so. And actually, the day that I heard back about my approval to be educational minister, it was last week. Yeah, it was last Wednesday, and actually, Pastor Sky reached out to me. He was the first to congratulate me. And although now officially announced, it still doesn't really feel very real. But I am very grateful and thankful to the Holy Trinity for allowing me to have this title, despite my uncertainty. Because, thinking about it more, having a title is an opportunity for me to do more for this history, to work more for this history, to kind of be a servant to what God wills and what God wants for me to really run, taking action in that way. And like I said, I officially received my title on February 5th, which was a Wednesday, and it was that Wednesday the message was titled, "Let's take action to the utmost and receive the utmost." Y'all know how whenever you have a message that happens to land on your birthday, like a Sunday or a Wednesday, it becomes almost like your message for that year. That's exactly what God wanted to tell you, which of course he does all the time, but it's even more so personal to you when you have those messages and services on your birthday. It's like God is telling you exactly what he wants for you. In the same way, for me, it was like being able to officially have this title of educational minister, and then hearing the Wednesday message at that time, it was almost as if I felt God telling me, well, let's run together, let's take action a lot, let's do everything together so that we can receive and make things in a great way for this history. So I'm very happy, and yes, I just wanted to share with you guys. Now, for my second topic of today,
in general, for the most part, I've gotten back into the swing of things, balancing work life and personal life and Providence life in general. And there's a lot to do, which I'm so grateful for. And especially there is a lot to do in the realm or in the area of evangelism. I think here in Houston, we've really gotten into the swing and into the rhythm of things regarding ministry. So far we've had a booth every single month at the start of this new semester. We've been having group Bible studies every other Thursday or so. We've had this new kind of resurgence and fire for ministry and evangelism, because it's not just one person who's doing it, but everyone is really doing it, and everyone's been set ablaze, which I think is the most important. And I think the reason why we're able to run in a more consistent way is because there's more than just one or two people running, right? It's a handful of people at least that are really encouraged to take action, and everyone feels then that willingness to support. But yes, like I've said, because we're constantly working diligently for ministry, usually my days are very busy. Specifically, my Thursdays are going to be my longest days. I work still from 7 to 3:30 p.m. And then on Thursdays, I'll just go straight to campus, because usually we have a group Bible study in the early evening or late afternoon. So I try my best to help, support, and set up and be there for them. But it's also because there's another individual Bible study that I do with a newcomer of ours on campus at 7 p.m. And so this topic that I wanted to talk about and bring up here for 2G Talks actually came as I was walking around campus last week. And I think it's something that is very prevalent and that I know many second gen struggle with at first to understand. Definitely for me, it was something that I really had to overcome, pray a lot about, discuss a lot with those that I felt very close to me, and also listen to and receive from the word. But this topic that I want to talk about is something that is so vastly critical and imperative to ensure that second gen, but also members, can stay in Providence until the very end, but more so that we can all have a higher level, a deeper relationship with Providence, and that we're not just staying because, for second gen, because of their parents, or because it's easier, or because it's a habit, right? So what I wanted to talk about today, it has to do with the one thing that everyone is searching for, right? The one thing that everyone wants, the things that you always see talked about in the movies and books and music and songs and things like that. It's all about love. More specifically, it has to do with relationships. And like I mentioned, I got this idea for today's topic of relationship for today because as I was walking around campus last week, I usually don't notice it, but I saw innumerable, just so many couples walking around, straight, gay, all the above. Everyone was just walking around campus together. And, usually I'm at work, or I go work and then I go straight home, so I'm not constantly being surrounded by people that are openly affectionate or PDA or things like that. But now, going back to the campuses, you see it more prevalently. And I know that many second gen, especially here in America, are going to be around the age of, middle school, high school, college. So they're going to be kind of exposed to a lot of that dating culture, a lot of that you need to have a relationship type of subconscious thought or influence and pressure that I think a lot of people, even in the world, feel. And so I wanted to talk about it because for second gen, this is a topic that is, yes, a little sensitive, maybe a little embarrassing, but I am very determined to talk about and very passionate in talking about. And I just wanted to share my point of view and helping second gen to realize what they're actually saying, right? So, for me, growing up, looking at people that were in relationships or couples, I always thought that it was so cute. I always thought they were so cute. Oh, that guy's so cute. That girl's so cute. They're so cute together. But then I would become anxious, right? And I would wonder, when is it my turn? Providence is so restricting. And I know this to be a fact among many second gen, that there's a lot of second gen that have this sentiment, right? But after growing older and seeing the reality of how people in the world treat love, you see it's not as it seems. It's not as amazing or incredible as the world likes to present itself. Now, this is a generalized statement, but often, right, not everyone, but very commonly, people in the world tend to date for a few reasons, right? Usually, people get into relationships because they're lonely, or because they simply want to have a significant other. It's not always as shown as in the movies, right? Where you see that person, then you just fall madly, deeply in love with them, or they did something great for you, or, it's not always like that, and it's usually not. A lot of the times that I've seen and experienced is that it's simply to be able to say that you have someone, or that there's someone for you to call your boyfriend or girlfriend. And so the love that they have for each other, yes, sure, you can call it love, but it ends up becoming very vain, and it's just not that fulfilling. Why? Why is it not as fulfilling? Well, this has to do with going all the way back at the very beginning of humans, right? The fall of mankind. Because of Adam and Eve, who turned away from God, everyone in the world is now fallen. And because of them, it set the precedent, the utmost need for Christ to come and restore the world once again. What? To restore people? Yes, but more than that, more importantly, the core of people is to restore the love of people, to recenter us and focus us back to God, right? What did Jesus tell us the first commandment was? The first commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your will, and with all your life. And then the second is to love your brothers as you would love yourself, right? But when you look at the world, or, in my case, as I was walking around campus, when you look at the couples, that's really not the case, right? People don't live to the best of their ability to love God first and then go love each other. It's just for a free-for-all. The amount of dating apps that people go on where you're just swiping, looking at just the physical characteristics, if they're attractive or not, and then deciding if you want to date that person, right? People are just running around anxiously trying to find love in a really vain attempt. And at the end of the day, because people are fallen in this way, superficial, they lack that main component of love, which is God, right? It's not how much she loves you, how much he loves you, how much that person loves you. No, none of that really matters, right? But it's because of God, because God is love. People will change. People will always change. People that you never thought would leave you, they can leave you. People you thought would never stop loving you will stop loving you. But if the center and the focus and the core is God, because God is love, then it will never change, right? And I think people really do forget, and maybe for second gen too, for me it took a long time for me to realize that God is actually so good and so amazing. And I was reminded of this after listening to the story, and we listened to it after the Wednesday service last week, the story of Sansan getting shocked by lightning. All right, I hope everyone is able to listen to that story. Essentially, the story was how Sansanim was attempting to spread the gospel at the very beginning. And because he had not been eating a lot of food, because it was cold, because of the incredible amount of stress on his body, his face started to produce, and boils were protruding from his face. And they were so painful and so unsightly, and so he became really embarrassed, and he couldn't preach the gospel anymore. And so instead at the time, he was homeless because he didn't have a place to stay, so he went and he lived at the church. And he was sleeping there at the very, very top, in kind of like the attic portion of the church, right below the church's, bell tower, or the cross that was there. And so that's where he would sleep every night. And he'd pray, so that the boils would go away because they were so painful, but also because people, were not interested in listening to someone who looked like that. And so the story goes that he was going through such incredible suffering in this way, right? And that God wasn't answering his prayers, no matter how much he prayed, but he never gave up, and he continuously prayed. And then one day, it started raining, and it started thundering. And then all of a sudden, as he was praying, the cross, the tower that he was sleeping in, was struck by lightning. And at first, he couldn't believe it. And then he smelt the burning smell of flesh. And he thought, I must be dead. Because he could smell the flesh that was burning. But he continued to pray, even through it all. Because, if his body's dead, why not just keep praying? So he continued to pray. And then after, he was finally able to start moving his body again. And he realized he was alive. And he realized that the smell of the burning flesh was not his physical body that died, but it was the boils that were on his face that had been essentially zapped or healed by that intense power of the lightning, that the heat from the lightning had destroyed and killed off all the bacteria and all the germs that were on his face, helping him to be healed. And so, again, if you haven't listened to it, I really suggest listening to it. It was an incredible kind of video story talking about this incredible miracle that God did of protecting Sansanim so that he didn't die from the lightning flash. But more so than that, there's two things that I took away from that story. Yes, Sansanim is so amazing for continuously loving God, even though he was suffering so much, right? But for me, when I was listening to the story, it was more so amazing because Sansanim was showing us, yes, right, how incredible he is, and someone that we should really look up to. But it was like Sansanim was using the story to show again how incredible God was, how God is so incredible. Because although it was the worst possible situation, right, like I mentioned, he was homeless, he had boils, painful boils on his face, he was sleeping in the church's attic. The reason why the lightning struck there was because the lightning rod had actually been taken. Somebody had sold it for candy. And the roof of the church underneath where Sansanim was sleeping had actually melted. The metal had melted. And although it was such a terrible situation, God took this incredibly unfortunate situation and environment, and according to reality, according to reason, made it so that it ended up being something so good, something so pure, something that actually ended up healing Sansanim. Something that actually ended up giving Sansanim so much strength. Because after the lightning strike, although he wasn't able to evangelize many people at the time, he realized that God really was with him, protecting him, and together with him. And so he gained so much strength and encouragement that God was able to save him from lightning. He could evangelize because God was with him, and he would evangelize. And so from then on, he was able to begin the ministry and the history of the complete Testament history in a great, grand way. And so, like I said, that story really moved me so much because people like to blame God for things all the time. And so I do believe in our, at least in American society and culture, there's an unconscious stigma against God in a lot of people. But because of this, like I said, people in the world, those who are in the world and in relationships, although it's something that I used to find appealing or something that perhaps some people do feel to be envious over, now it really no longer is. Because I realize that people in the world don't have love, true love, perfect love. Love that's like God. Love that, although there's so much suffering and so much difficulties and trials, God, love, is always going to find the way to give you the best possible outcome, as long as you stay together with him. And yeah, I do think for second gen, it's really hard at times to love God, to see God, to trust in God, right? Because you can't touch him. You can't look at him. You know, if you're having a hard day, you can pray, sure, but it's not like he's going to answer you, right? Most of us can't hear the voice of God. But just like Sun said in this past week's Sunday message, right? He talked about 10 different topics. But the one that I wanted to bring up very briefly, and it was more of a subsection of a topic, was that because God is so big, right? He's larger than life. His actions and the things he does for us are larger than life. So we can't always see it so clearly. So to us, we could be praying about our difficulty and feel like God's just not taking action on it, that he's not listening, that he doesn't care, or maybe even in extreme situations and circumstances, you could come to the conclusion that God simply doesn't exist. But that's not the case, right? Because Sun said to us, an hour for us is just a millisecond to God. So we can't lose hope. Don't ever feel like God doesn't love you. So rather than trying to get love from the world and going out and searching for it, right? Because Satan does a great job of making things look shiny and appetizing, but on the inside, everything's rotten. So instead, I hope that the second gen that listen to this, and even members that are listening to this, that we can really instead work hard on making ourselves into good people. Because when you make yourself into someone really good, you can't help but love yourself, right? And not only that, but I hope that we can also find other good, wonderful, amazing people like us in the world to evangelize. Because they're out there. Sun told us to evangelize, so they must be out there, right? We need to find those people who also want to come to love God more, who want more from this life than just living that individualistic, self-centered life. So I think as long as we take action in really big ways centered on God, then really big, great things, amazing things will happen. So yes, let's not lose hope. Okay. So with that, I'll wrap up today's segment for 2G Talks. I, again, know that talking about relationships and opposite sex can be very difficult and very trying for many second gen. But at the very core of it all, everyone just wants to be loved. And you will always be loved the most, not by people, but by God. So don't ever forget that. Anyways, as always, please feel free to leave a comment or like, or shoot Eddie and I an email at 2gtalks@gmail.com. I hope that you'll have a great rest of your Tuesday together with the Lord. I'll chat with you guys next week.